May in 2024, people looking out over San Francisco Bay spotted something that completely defied logic. A fully intact two-story house, complete with a white picket fence, was bobbing precariously on the choppy open water. That surreal footage captures the latest chapter in a century-old San Francisco tradition of uprooting entire buildings and dragging them across the city, and sometimes across the sea. To understand why people here treat real estate like a mobile asset, we have to look back to the gold rush. In a single year, San Francisco exploded from a sleepy outpost of just 1,000 people into a chaotic metropolis of 25,000. All those new arrivals demanded immediate housing. The region lacked brick kilns, so builders looked north to the old-growth redwood forests. They harvested a massive scale of this timber and embraced balloon frame construction, a revolutionary method using pre-cut lumber. Builders could assemble grand homes almost like kits. They erected an instant city, but in the process, they created a fragile, entirely wooden metropolis. That fragile woodpile met its match on April 18, 1906. An earthquake struck, the city ignited, and the resulting fires burned for 3 days. By the time the smoke cleared, 28,000 buildings had been consumed. The disaster physically split the city in two. You had a total burn zone of charred rubble, and right next to it, a survivor zone where thousands of intact Victorian homes still stood untouched. But surviving the flames didn't guarantee those homes would stay. In the panic following the catastrophe, city officials drastically expanded the fire limits. With a stroke of a pen, those surviving wooden houses became legally obsolete. Homeowners were caught in an economic paradox. The land beneath their feet was suddenly hyper-valuable, earmarked for a modern, fireproof skyline. Yet the tall wooden structures they lived in were no longer permitted on those lots. Faced with losing everything, residents realized their grand Victorian houses were relatively light, highly valuable, and standing in the wrong place. They decided a building didn't have to die where it was built. The initial phase of relocation relied heavily on the material the homes were built from. Because redwood is lightweight, movers could jack up these Victorians, suspend them on rolling platforms, and haul them down paved streets into safe zones. Soon, engineers pushed this concept well beyond wooden frames. When the Newton J. Tharp Commercial School, a massive 8,000-ton brick structure, stood in the way of a new civic center, the city opted to move it rather than demolish it. Crews sliced directly through the brick walls, severing the building from its foundation, then inserted a grid of steel beams and timber rollers. The true test came during the inch-by-inch crawl, pivoting the massive brick fortress 90 degrees within a four-way intersection. The sheer scale of these land moves peaked in 1974. Faced with massive highway expansions, activists saved 12 separate Victorians by moving them all simultaneously. The spectacle was so massive that onlookers described it as a herd of elephants navigating the streets. These land campaigns proved human engineering could overcome gravity and massive tonnage. But as San Francisco modernized, a tangled web of overhead electric trolley lines and utility poles emerged, rapidly closing the window to move large buildings over land. Those overhead electric lines, combined with increasingly narrow suburban roads, made traditional transit impossible for anything larger than a small shack. With the streets blocked, movers turned to the sea. This approach was perfectly demonstrated by the rescue of the Lyford House, an 1876 mansion standing squarely in the path of a post-war suburban development and slated for demolition. Engineers built a timber cradle extending over the water and waited for a king tide. At the peak, a barge slid beneath the foundation. As the tide receded, the ocean gently lowered the building onto the barge, detaching it entirely from land. Treating the bay as a water highway bypassed the tangled city grid. With a single tugboat, they could effortlessly pull a mansion across open water, achieving a physical feat 50 horses could never manage on solid ground. The floating house from 2024 belonged to Docktown, a community of residences built directly on water. Following a long legal battle over public waterways, the owner was forced to vacate, leading to the structure's precarious journey across the bay. Relocating it proved terrifying. Towing a multi-story home through unpredictable bay currents is extremely dangerous because the tall, flat design catches wind like a giant sail. This creates a severe tipping fulcrum against the barge. The operation nearly ended in disaster when high winds and shifting currents hit the broad side of the home. As the structure began leaning precariously, the tugboat captain was forced to abandon the transit for safety. leaving the top-heavy house adrift for 2 days. Crews had to weep for a narrow window of dead calm weather to execute a precision recapture. They successfully secured the leaning house and threaded it beneath the Richardson Bay Bridge, clearing the concrete with only inches to spare. The sheer risk and chaos involved in this modern tow proves a deeper point. The culture of moving entire structures is so deeply entrenched in the Bay Area that residents will battle the ocean itself to save their homes. Today, pulling off an architectural move comes at a staggering premium. In 2021, rolling the 139-year-old Englander house just a few blocks down Franklin Street cost nearly $500,000, and that's before factoring in the immense collateral disruption. To clear the path for a Victorian, planners rip out parking meters, unbolt heavy streetlights, and aggressively cut back decades-old trees. Yet citizens are still willing to pay this steep price. They do it to protect the ornate gingerbread-like trims, the iconic bay windows, and the colorful wooden facades that define the city's visual soul. San Franciscans view these historic, balloon-framed houses as movable art worth extreme effort to save. It leaves you wondering, in a century, will the glass and steel skyscrapers we build today ever inspire this kind of gravity-defying devotion?